Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mormon Newscast. It is Monday night. It's February 23rd, and I am joined by Bill Reel tonight. RFM has the night off. How are you, Bill?
Good, good. How's life treating you, Rebecca?
Not too bad. We actually just were together in person just a day ago and spent the weekend at Thrive, and we'll talk about that in a second here. So I think maybe we have a little bit of a Thrive hangover, right? I mean, I don't mean hangover. I mean like just it was so much and so fun. So let's go over to our slides and we'll go through the stories that we are going to cover today, and then we'll talk about a few little items here. So there was actually a lot of news this week. I was surprised once we put it all together with just the two of us to cover it, but I think it's going to be great. We're going to talk about LDS Apologists address growth or decline. This is the story I'm most interested in here tonight, and Bill's going to take that one. Missionary safety in Mexico is a concern. I'm going to do is kind of a breaking news update on that. LDS dumping stock. What does it mean? This was a story from about a week ago, and it's pretty interesting. Secret Fairview temple groundbreaking. That'll be mine, of course. Temple busting. Any forms of TOK, Bill's going to delve into that. That's always the question in Mormonism. LDS Conference Center closure. I will talk about that for a minute. LDS garment history in the news. Believe it or not, it's not me talking about garments. That's going to be Bill's story. And Latter-day Saints talk sex. Do they? Bill will let us know on that one. So I first wanted to, and I think Bill does too, just thank everybody that came up and talked to us at Thrive. Did you have tons of people, Bill, that just came up and introduced themselves? It was just so fun.
It's that way anytime we get together for a conference like this, and it's such an appreciative thing to put all the work in that we do over the course of a year, and then to have people come up who say thank you for what that does for them, their ability to sort of process Mormonism and to be able to make sense of things because of the content that you, RFM, and others put out.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing experience. And I mean, there were hundreds more than had been there last year when I attended. You can see here some pictures. RFM and Bill did a Mormonism Live episode. It was fantastic. These funny pictures on the right are John DeLynn helping out with the tech by holding a mic up to RFM while he does some rockin' hat antics. And I, of course, had to use AI because that position was so funny to me. And, put in a diamond ring and make it a marriage proposal. I thought that was cute. Over on the left, my co-host on Mormonish, Landon, and I, we did a presentation on Sunday morning and told some of our personal stories. But, oh my gosh, everybody was amazing. It was incredible. If you have not been to Thrive, start thinking about it for next year. It's always that third week in February, and it's just incredible. So I encourage everybody to go. All right, let's go over to this little breaking story here, and I'm going to pull up my slides so I can read it. There has been a lot of unrest in Mexico right now, and whenever you hear that, you can see those headlines I've kind of thrown up there having to do with the cartel. The first thing that you worry about, at least the first thing I worry about, are the missionaries over there, because I call them kids. They are kids, and they're there, and in over their heads. Are they being protected? What is happening? So today somebody sent me a statement from the president of the Mexico. Do you know how to pronounce that, Bill? Is it Oaxaca mission? I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments, but it's a mission in Mexico.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I don't know either. So I'll just read this really quick. This is our breaking news because this just is unfolding right now. Barely happened yesterday. Dear parents, friends, family, and friends of our missionaries in this particular Mexican mission. Today, the Mexican army, in an armed confrontation in Jalisco, Mexico, shot down Ruben N. And this has caused that in 9 states of Mexico, members of the criminal organization are conducting blockades for criminal purposes, setting vehicles, trucks, and trailers on fire in an attempt to avenge the death of their leader. So it's a retaliation kind of a scenario. All our missionaries are safe and well in the areas of, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. We have decided in a preventative manner that the 66 elders and sisters currently serving there remain protected in their homes and do not go out to the streets for any reason until further notice. This could last for several days. We are in constant communication with each of the missionaries. The physical integrity of our missionaries is the most important thing right now. We have given you permission to send a message to your parents informing them that they are okay in order to reassure them Thank you for your prayers for each of us. So sounds like, and I know a lot of people are trapped. A lot of tourists are trapped. And it looks like the missionaries are just going to be sheltering in place and have been given permission to let their parents know for now they're okay. What do you think about this situation, Bill?
Yeah, I'll just say that the way the politics work, the Mexican government has been for a long period of time lenient with the Mexican cartel and given them some cover to some extent. And in this event here, it looks like the Mexican government, with assistance from others, including the United States, is trying to sort of get rid of some of the influence that the Mexican cartel has. And they've taken out their top leader. And I imagine there's going to be quite a bit of push and pull as the government and the drug lords sort that out. And again, I'm not trying to speak to it from some crazy angle, but just to say that, when institutions hold a lot of power, when groups hold a lot of power and suddenly they're trying to be put in line, it is normal to sort of push back. And the violence that could happen here could be incredible. And I'm hoping it settles down quickly.
I hope so too. And, I made a little short today where I just kind of said, get those kids out of there, which, is easier said than done. Of course, flights are canceled and everything's grounded. So keeping them inside, I think, is probably the safest thing. But interestingly, after I posted the short that I made, I had some other people contact me from other places and say, this is in the news right now, but missionary safety is always a concern. Somebody contacted me from Guatemala and said they weren't even a member of the church, but they're, a family member or a girlfriend was. And they said, we've had a missionary here that was attacked by a lion, sisters that were robbed at gunpoint, missionaries that have food poisoning. And the most interesting thing this person told me is that other denominations that are down there, other, Christian churches trying to do charitable work, are concerned about LDS missionaries and wondering if perhaps their safety is being taken, as seriously as it should, or if people are being naive about it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. When something like this pops up, we're all over the safety, but we don't think about it all the time. So we'll keep everybody informed on this. But yeah, this was, and here's a picture of the mission president and his wife who put out this letter. So really touchy situation that we'll keep monitoring. So I think the next story then is our big one from our thumbnail. Bill, why don't you tell us about this one?
All right. So a growing wave of apologetic content is pushing back against the widespread perception that Latter-day Saints are leaving the church in large numbers. In several recent YouTube shorts and a longer interview on the Informed Saints channel, apologists Jasmine and Neil Rapoli argue that the narrative of mass disaffiliation is overstated or misunderstood. They point to overall church growth numbers and emphasize research suggesting that Latter-day Saints who identify with the religion today are among the most active and committed of any faith group. They say the church isn't collapsing and instead argue it's becoming more concentrated with more deeply committed believers. Central to their argument is research from BYU professor Justin Dyer, who says the data needs to be viewed from a broader, longer-term lens. Now, he notes that in the past, many people identified as LDS without actively participating, whereas today, and we'll get into these details here, and we show some of the visuals that he put up during that conversation. So many people identified as LDS in the past without actively participating, whereas today, fewer people claim the identity unless they are genuinely involved. He also points to key predictors of disaffiliation, including a lack of personal spiritual connection and rise of strong political identities that override religious identity. If that sounds like I'm just talking too fast, I promise we'll slow down here in just a moment. In the following story, we'll take a closer look at these claims, the data behind them, and whether they fully account for what many observers see as a significant shift underway inside Mormonism. We've talked about this so many times over the last, I'll say, weeks and months. And I'll just note, here's the first graph. This one says changes in adult religious attendance by religion over time. And what they're trying to say here, what Justin Dyer said when he put this graph up, he said those who identified as Latter-day Saints continued attending. In other words, he's trying to note that there are people who are leaving, and we'll get into in a minute whether there are a lot of people or not that are leaving. But for those who stay, in terms of identifying themselves as Latter-day Saints. When they're asked in religious surveys, when they're asked in research, for instance, the Pew Research, when they go around and do their surveys, for those people who identify as Latter-day Saints, they are continuing to attend the church. And Latter-day Saints who identify as such and continue to attend, their attendance statistically is among the highest among religions. This next one here, this graph says retention in religious service attendance. And the points he was making here is that in earlier times, people identified as LDS, but large numbers of them didn't attend. So I can remember this. If I go back to when I joined the church in the late 90s even, we had a ward of about 400 people on the records, and we had about 120 who showed up at church every Sunday. If we were to go around and ask people, the majority of the inactive people would still tell you that they were Mormon. Yeah. But today, that's not the case. Today, people are not identifying as Latter-day Saint if they are not attending. When they stop attending the church, they no longer think of themselves as Latter-day Saints for sometimes antagonistic reasons, like that church hurt me, and we'll talk about the abuse here in a moment. That church hurt me. I'm not one of them anymore. It might be just a matter of deconstructing the religion and thinking that its truth claims are not true. And for whatever reason, when someone decides they no longer are going to be one of the fold in terms of activity, in today's world, those people no longer identify themselves as Latter-day Saints. For those who do identify, though, one is much more likely than in other faiths to be active, which is what we also showed on the last slide. He also noted, Justin Dyer also noted, that high demand religions are more likely to keep a hold of members. Jasmine and Neil and Justin tried to paint that as good reasons why that happens, that it's good to have a high demand religion. Knowing the bite model, understanding the abuse that comes out of high demand religions, the manipulation and the inability to be honest about one's history and narrative, I would very much disagree with them, but that's the point that that's the perspective that they hold. All right, this one here, we've got two tables on the right. The top one says statistically significant predictors of de-identifying between 2020 and 2024. And by the way, if any of these graphs are interesting, simply pause the show. You can read them. I just want to go into the points that Justin Dyer made. This is his paper that contained these data points. Now, these show up in surveys that are beyond his work, but he's utilizing them. And when he put these graphs up, these were the points that he was making on the left. So you can take time to read the graphs on the right. The one on the bottom is political ideology across groups of those no longer identifying as Latter-day Saints. Now, this one's his because he said they divided up the Latter-day Saints into four categories: faith keepers, faith leaners, faith distant, and faith rejectors. And he made some points about those. We'll go into those here on this slide and the next one. The biggest predictor, he said, of those who leave the faith is one, not having a daily connection with God. And that's demonstrated in that graphic in the top right corner of this slide. And number two, extreme political identity on both sides, conservative or liberal, when it supersedes their religious identity. And I see this all the time. And you see this too, Rebecca, when we go into stories where the Latter-day Saints are disagreeing with the church because their political view is stronger than the stance that the church has from a religious perspective. And so anytime somebody is extreme conservative or extreme liberal, and that identity is more important to them, more central to who they are and what they relate to or what they connect with, then when their church does something different, they're going to choose in that battle of cognitive dissonance, they're going to choose their political identity. And so extreme political identity and having a daily connection of God, he said, were the two biggest factors behind those who leave the faith. So I'll just note that. And I've always sort of thought these kinds of things. I'll say this, which is we are in this subset of a group that pays attention to cultural things and historical issues and harm to marginalized groups. Some of that plays into the political extremes and where one kind of centers their identity. But there are parts of it that doesn't. But I've always been self-aware enough to know that the group that we speak to, who takes a high fascination in wanting to know what happened when that person was in the church years ago, how the church shifted and changed, whether its history lives up to the claims that it makes, and whether the church is acting healthy and responsible toward marginalized groups, may not be the biggest subset of people who leave the church. And there are lots of reasons why people leave, and I think this is true for the majority of them. I think he's right about number 1 and 2. At least that's what the data says. All right, this one here, a typical profile of a post-Mormon, and they called it ex-Mormon. I don't like that word because ex-Mormon speaks more to you're no longer in this group, whereas post-Mormon is a phrase that indicates the value of the individual and the group that they stepped away from. And so I've always saw ex-Mormon as a pejorative and post-Mormon as a softer, more respectful of the individual and their journey of them leaving the faith. But whichever one you want to use, so be it. They noted that faith keepers and faith leaners, generally they disconnect from the church because of life changes. In other words, they still have a connection to the church, but they moved, they got divorced, they changed jobs, whatever it was. They had some life event that happened that their activity in the church, it just took that little shift or change for them to suddenly become disconnected from it. And this was the point that Jasmine was making in one of her shorts. And I think she makes this point because of what Justin Dyer says next, which is these people would come back if they had a community or a friend connection in the church. So if there was just somebody who put their arms around them, and it reminds me of Gordon B. Hinckley. What was it? Every member needs a calling, a responsibility, a friend, and to be nourished by the good word of God. And I think Gordon was right in those regards. I think giving somebody a responsibility in the church is great. Them feeling connected to that system's scriptures are great. But I do think that a friend plays a huge part. Now, they didn't say anything about the faith distant group. That was the third group. So the faith keepers, the faith leaners, and then the faith distant, nothing was said. But they did spend a little bit of time talking about the faith rejectors. And they said the faith rejectors often see religion as harmful. They don't believe anymore. They're politically more liberal, and they're more likely to have experienced religious abuse. And I can't disagree with any of that. So I think they hit the nail on the head there. So we'll just note that as well. And then here on this slide, Americans who were raised in religion and had a positive experience are more likely to have stayed. And I think this is a big deal. I think we all intuitively get, anecdotal as it may be, by our interaction in this space, that for those who have an entirely positive experience, they often will remain in the church no matter what problems they're confronted with. They've got the workarounds for those. And for those on this side, there has been, that we are aware of considerable harm that has been done. And that just leaves the kind of bad taste in one's mouth that they just can't get right with. And so I think they made some good points sort of talking about that dichotomy of those who have good experiences and those who have bad experiences. Here is where I thought was the most interesting, and we'll tie in some things that Clark Gilbert said recently, and we'll point back to something that Elder Oaks said not too long ago. But this is Latter-day Saint retention rate in 2025 by gender and age. And Jasmine, I thought, asked a really good question at this moment in the interview. She was trying to have Justin Dyer, again, the statistician who was sharing the data, she wanted him to explain, like, okay, when you talk about this data, are you talking about old people when they were the same age as the young people, like the old people of in today, when they were young, let's say 25, for instance, compared to 25-year-olds today, or are you comparing older people today and how many of them are leaving in this moment versus how many young people are leaving in this moment? So because she asked that question, he spoke to both of those. And some of the points that he made here is that younger female members, and we've talked about this a bunch lately, younger female members are leaving the church at a significantly higher rate than their older counterparts. So in this graph, you can see age in 2025. Female is the purple line, male is the green line. You've got the age from 18 to 78. Yes, there's people that fall outside of those, but they're just talking adults. And over the age of 78, I guess they just didn't care as much. But 18 to 78. And at 18 years old, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 35% of females are choosing to stay active in the LDS Church. I'm going to say, by the way, I think this is those who identify. Because I think we all understand the activity rates around 35% anyway. So that would be, to me, mind-blowing. Men at the same age who identify as Latter-day Saints are around 57% who stay, not leave. This is the retention rate. This is those who stay. That discrepancy is huge. You have to get all the way up to 78 years old before women are staying in the church at a higher rate than men. I think this alone explains so much of the church choosing softer language and acknowledging it needs to make changes around women. The second point he made was young adult females today are leaving the church at a much higher rate than young adult females in generations past. We've talked about this. We've said in the past, it was always women who hung around the church, and it was the men who were difficult to keep active. That was true in generations past. In today's world, that is not true. The church is not meeting the needs of women, and they are leaving. By this graph alone, they are leaving in droves. I don't think that can be argued with. And then the last thing he said is that women are leaving the church at higher rates than men, and we can see that here on this graph. Women just aren't sticking around. And this is such a difference from, again, generations past. And I want to tie this into what Clark Gilbert did. This was a recent article on the Exponent 2. New Apostle explains how great he is at women. I thought that was a great line. I'm going to read these 4 paragraphs. I do want to note, though, several months ago, this was back in October of 25. If we remember when the first presidency was first called, Elder Oaks stated, "We have work left to do," quote unquote, to boost women. And he acknowledged that we've got changes to make in order to keep the ongoing restoration working for the females in the church. And when you understand that they get the data, they see it, they know that women are leaving at essentially twice the rate that men are in the church from the younger generation. It makes perfect sense when you understand that they clearly get that in a generation or two, there are no women here to have LDS children, and the church clearly begins a significant decline if females are not brought back to at least somewhere around the rate of male activity. So this was Abby Maxwell Hansen. I thought she did a beautiful job in this article she wrote. She says, I listened to an interview with newly called apostle Clark Gilbert by Peggy Fletcher Stack of the Salt Lake Tribune. And we talked about that interview maybe last week or the week before. When asked what more could be done to elevate women in the church, Clark Gilbert said, quote, "When I was a bishop, we were in a ward council meeting and we weren't getting an answer. I just closed my eyes and prayed. What are we supposed to do here?" he said. And he says, "I heard the Spirit say, quote, there is an answer to this, I gave it to your young women president. Ask her to share her voice, unquote. It was amazing how that council couldn't work until everyone felt safe to share their feelings. I was the key holder in that meeting, but the Lord didn't give me the answer. And here's what Abby had to say about that. And I thought she was very insightful about this observation. Here's the problem, Abby says. It is always a man in the position of getting to choose whether to listen to a woman or not. He was still the one in the position of power and authority in this story. He still got to choose to ask her. He still had to be willing to go ahead with her idea, even if he didn't like it. He was still the one who everyone in the room would side with and support if they disagreed, not her. He still had the ultimate final say over everything. And of course, he was the one who'd been prepared to step into priesthood leadership since he was a 12-year-old deacon. And in the end, this was the story about him, not her. It was a story about how he was so in tune with the Spirit and such a good listener that he was able to know which person in the room, even a woman, would have the best idea. He didn't run an incredibly inclusive council or belong to an egalitarian church that women just naturally felt comfortable to voice their opinions to everyone like men. Instead, he was an authority figure in an organization where women's opinion would only be shared if he, as a powerful man, decided to draw it out of her by a direct request. And I thought that was such a great, insightful observation. Any thoughts from you? I got maybe one or two more slides, but any thoughts from you on what few young females are staying around in the church, and this story from Clark Gilbert, where his blind spot is that he holds the priesthood, and this really is still a story about him and being in tune with the Holy Ghost, and has really nothing about the ability of women to add to the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's not aware at all when he told that story. I'm sure he thought he was magnanimously, championing women. So, no, I think that the statistic of women stepping away is terrifying to the church, because I think they've taken women for granted for a very long time. They're just going to be here. They're going to stay. They're going to raise the kids in righteousness. They're going to be the moms. We don't need to worry about them. They're content. They're happy. They don't need to sit on the stand. They just don't consider women. And now all of a sudden, here's this data. And that's terrifying, because we all know the women, teach the children. The women have a huge influence. I believe that this is why women going on missions at age 18 is what they're going to do now, because it's that gap. We have other statistics we've talked about here on the newscast, Bill. If you remember that show, it's that gap there, 18, 19, 20, where young women finally have the chance to maybe leave home for the first time, or, go get a job, kind of get more out of their parents, under their thumb, or their church leaders. And when they have that freedom, when they come up for air and they're able to think for a minute, a lot of them leave, and a lot of them leave over social issues, because, they're exposed to things as they are able to move out of this insulated silo of a community that they've been in, and the rhetoric that they hear all the time. And that's when they step away. So that's not going to happen anymore. They are going to step from one insulated community in their parents' home into a mission, into a marriage, where they need the church to support because of all the difficulties of young marriage and having a lot of children really early. So I think it's by design. I think they're terrified of the statistic.
Yeah, I'll just note too, looking at this graphic again, I'll say again, there's no way this can just be the way the church calculates members of the church, because you're showing essentially that men on average, if we're talking about converts and those born in the covenant, that somewhere in the range of 60% of men stay active in the church, and maybe somewhere in the range of 50% of women stay active in the church. We all know the activity rate of Mormons is somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 35%. So this clearly indicates to me that what they're basing this on is that data that we talked about previously, where people are self-identifying as Latter-day Saints, whereas many people who have left the church no longer do. And I'll just say here, you're going to see a ton of changes, I think, in the church in the next 5 to 10 years. They can't wait forever. Elder Oaks indicated it. Basically, what he's saying is, we see this data, and we can't sit still. We're going to have to do things to accommodate our female members of the church. So I'm anticipating over the next 5 to 10 years, and maybe sooner, that you're going to see drastic changes that will be under the banner of Revelation that will dramatically shift how women see themselves in the church and the gifts they're able to share, the authority they're allowed to have, and the responsibilities that they get to take part in. And so I've got a lot of things to say about the way this church handles change, the way it doesn't talk openly about why those changes happened or where those changes came from. But I also have to applaud that I think these changes will be positive and give women more visibility and more ability to contribute to the ward and have their own voice. And so I'm looking forward to that. I'll just note. Okay, 2 other slides. This one, Deseret News article from December 15th of 25. Latter-day Saints are retaining faith at a uniquely high levels in a secularizing society. That's what the Deseret News wanted to say. What did Justin Dyer said? Justin Dyer said that LDS retention rate is down since the 1980s. And he said the trajectory is downward too. So it's not just that we have today is lower than 1980. It's that from 1980 to today, it has constantly gone down year after year after year. And then what they finished off this podcast saying was that, the things going on today indicate a decline. And their words were, but we can hope that the future changes. We can hope that sometime in the future, things are different, that this church will adjust, and we hold out hope that things can get righted, that your ship can get right. And I'll just note that kind of language implies that while they didn't want to say all of it out loud, that things look to some degree bleaker in this moment than they wish they did, and that they weren't heading in the right direction. That's a very different message than how the church wants to frame its growth. And I would recommend for anybody interested in this episode, you can simply go on to the YouTube channel Informed Saints, and you can see the full interview with Justin Dyer. And I think you'll notice, just as I did, that towards the end, there was an acknowledgement that things were not good, and that all they had was to hope that something would change in the future. And I don't think I'm painting that incorrectly. And then lastly, this is one I've had to wrestle with. They talk about suicide rates in the United States. This is sort of a side tangent, but they did speak on it. I did at least want to show the audience. We have this idea that suicide in more heavily Mormon populations is much higher than in other populations that are made up of mostly non-Mormons. And so that Utah would be higher than, other places. When we look at it by geographic region, they pointed out, again, I don't know if this is true or not. I've heard things that counter this, but I'll simply say what they shared. They shared this graph and said that in geographical locations similar in region, that the suicide rate is comparable, and that Utah is actually lower than others that are nearby. And that certain places in the country, you can see they're sort of in Central America, Central United States, I should say, all the way from the south, Texas, all the way up to the north. The green there is indicative of lower suicide rates, somewhere in the range of 5 per 1,000. And then in the dark red, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 per 100,000. And in the red, somewhere in the range of 30 per 100,000. And it really does depend a lot on region, for whatever reasons those are. I know some people have pointed to altitude. I have no doubts that being in a high demand fundamentalist religion has both positives and negatives on that, and that many of us in this crowd know of those negatives. We talk about them, we're aware of them, but I would at least caution people to be careful of blanket statements. At least some data points to suicide rates being comparable in nearby regions, and maybe even lower among heavily Mormon regions than other places. Again, I'll leave it up to others to research that and offer any discrepancies to that data. And then this is our next story, so I'll just pull that down for a second and see if you have any final thoughts on this one.
Yeah, it was just very interesting to see them address this in, sort of a thoughtful way, right? You see a lot of things from the faithful side where they're just like, it's not real, no one's leaving, and they really dug into this. So that's what I found very interesting, which tells me maybe they now realize I've got to acknowledge this because I can't ignore it anymore. And what can we do? And that's a healthy way to do it. But I liked what you said about the changes that may come for women. I agree with you there. But again, data, research driven, survey driven changes, just like the priesthood ban. They didn't change that till all their data and research showed them that society had moved past them and this was not acceptable anymore. And so it's not like they're ever ahead of the game or prophetic or doing something ahead of their time that they can say, oh my gosh, look at the LDS Church. They've been doing this for a century for women. No, it's finally, it's the 11th hour. They're desperate. The women are leaving. The data shows it. The research shows it. The surveys show it. And now they're going to have some kind of revelations, giving women some of the things that may make them feel like they're important, that they're heard, and may encourage them to stay. So we'll watch, but I agree with you. There'll be some changes.
Yeah, and I'll just say lastly, if you're the last one to figure something out, if the people in the world are saying it, if the people who have left your faith, the critics are saying it, if your own members are noting it to you, and you're the last one to figure it out, I think that's sort of the opposite of prophets, seers, and revelators.
Yeah. No, great coverage on that. That's absolutely true. It makes me think of Sam Young, who we hung out with this weekend. It was fantastic. And, he was beating that drum of, child interviews. Let's not do it. He kept saying it over and over. And he was echoing many other people that said it. And, they kicked him out, excommunicated him for that. And then they decided, okay, yeah, maybe we better change a little bit and invite parents in, so always the last one to come up with something that seems pretty obvious, especially when it comes to safety of children or, allowing women to have equal footing. So it'll be really interesting to watch and to watch them say, after careful prayer and consideration and, pleading with the Lord and receiving revelation, we've decided that women can do X, we'll all know it's the data, it's the research, it's the surveys. So, but still positive changes for people. And that's what you want, because a lot of us either are inside the church or have friends and family inside. So it's a good thing. All right. The other big story, I consider one of the bigger stories that came out that everybody was kind of talking about this week, has to do with Ensign Peak and the church's finance. And the headline is, why is the LDS Church dumping billions of stocks? This is a good question, because this is extremely uncharacteristic of what they do. We have not really seen this before. And of course, when they do something unique or different, people take notice. And we're going to talk about what different people are saying. So a summary of the article says, a new report from the Salt Lake Tribune reveals that the LDS Church is quietly carrying out one of the largest investment moves in its history. It's selling off billions of dollars in stocks over the past 6 months. According to the federal financial disclosures, the church's investment arm, Ensign Peak Advisors, sold roughly 7.7 billion with a B, billion, worth of stock between late 2025 quarters. About 5.6 billion of that came just in the final quarter of the year alone, making it the biggest sell-off since the church began publicly reporting its holdings in 2020. What did you first think when you heard that, Bill, or saw that headline?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. RFM and I have talked before about the church, the money that it has invested, and that if it would have just had it managed by putting all of it in the S&P 500, yeah, it would have actually gotten a better return than it did by having all of these dummy companies and all of these backdoor channels and paying people tons of money to try to make the smartest of decisions and how you invested it. And then you see that fund build up to, 200 and something billion, to the point now where I think in total assets, they've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 320 billion. And now we're in this moment where there's so much chaos and division in how people feel about whether the market's going to go up or it's going to go down. And now we're looking at a moment where the church is wanting to take out some of its winnings, let's say, and set them aside so that if something maybe drastic happens or whatever goes on, and I'm sure you'll tell us more about their reasoning, but at least one potential reason is to protect some of that money from the stock market going down.
Yeah, and that's true. There's a lot of speculation on why did they do this, and I remember back, when my parents were younger, investing, at least in where they were going to church was seen as gambling, encouraged not to do that, even though the LDS Church did it. And, the LDS Church came out and said, we don't want to let people really know that we invest because then they will follow suit. They will try to copy what we're doing, right? And I did have that thought about this, because we don't know exactly why they did it. We're going to go through some speculation on it, but are members going to look at this and go, oh, should I take my money out? I mean, a lot of them follow very rigidly what the LDS Church does. So I thought I would quickly go through a couple statements about Ensign Peak. We have this famous one from the head of Ensign Peak Advisors. He said church leaders were concerned. This is explaining why they have so much freaking money and didn't tell anybody. That public knowledge of the fund's wealth might discourage tithing. Paying tithing is more of a sense of commitment than it is the church needing the money. So they never wanted to be in a position where people felt like they shouldn't make a contribution. These are some of the just extremely problematic things swirling around Ensign Peak. I won't read this whole one, but of course, this is whistleblower David Nelson, who pointed out that Ensign Peak has only ever made 2, actual withdrawals, and these are given to companies that were for profit to bail out Beneficial Life, right? The Monson's company, and to bail out the City Creek Mall. So Ensign Peak already has kind of a very dicey history, as we all know. So the article goes on to say, even after the massive sale, the church still, of course, holds U.S. stocks and portfolios of about 56 billion, meaning that it isn't in any kind of a financial crisis, but still this is they're saying a strategic shift in what they would normally do. And of course, this does make people wonder what has happened. Financial analysts quoted in the article say that this move represents a noticeable departure from Ensign Peak's traditional strategy, which is long tracked major market indexes in the S&P 500. You talked about that, Bill. Instead of small adjustments, the church reduced positions across many large, well-known companies, suggesting a broader change in investment direction. They didn't just do this kind of in one place. They spread it out and divested all over. In the Salt Lake Tribune, it said analysis shows that the multi-billion-dollar sale came primarily from Ensign Peak's 500 largest stock positions, shedding shares in blue chip stocks from some of the world's largest publicly traded companies. So they're just dumping it. I mean, it's not this little obscure stock. These are big name stocks. These sales, combined with wider market upswings in October, November, and December, lowered the total portfolio's value to $56.6 billion, down from a record high of $60.9 billion in the previous quarter. So that's quite a fall, and it seems to be intentional. And people, of course, the article says, so why sell now, right? There are different reasons that people are speculating on. They're saying insider information. Have you heard that one, Bill? Maybe a revelation, maybe insider information. And what does that mean if that's true, Bill?
Well, one thought would be that we had from Gordon Smith this indication that in politics, one's loyalty among LDS politicians is often prioritized as the church first and the citizens of the state or country that person represents second. Meaning that if a politician who was church broke came into and had a close relationship with LDS leadership and was aware of information that would save the church tons of money in losses if they knew of something that was down the road, some event that none of us could get to see, but that political, government committees would be talking about, one could reach out to the church in that office and break the rules, which it wouldn't be the first time that's happened. Break the rules of decor and ethics, and essentially give the church insider information. That's certainly within the realm of possibilities.
No, it really is. And that's what a lot of people are really suggesting it is. Other suggestions are a way to sort of obscure the funds, hide the money a little more. And I've talked to somebody in finance, and I have a quote from them that says this possibly is it. And possibly maybe there's a big project coming up that they need the funds for. So I can't imagine the church did not realize what kind of scrutiny this would be under, doing something completely off the cuff. None of us have seen this before. So I won't read all of these, but these are just some quotes about Ensign Peak. If people aren't really familiar, you can freeze and read. So it says the timing.
Can I share one other option?
Yeah, go ahead.
Church has made so much money in the market that the worst thing in the world for them would be to leave it in and something bad happen.
Very true.
It makes sense to take some of that money out. That again, they've got so much. It's not like they need to capitalize on every cent they have in terms of leaving it in and making money on it. You take some of those winnings essentially and you set them off to the side so that if something bad happens, you didn't just put it all at risk. And whether that's 10 billion or 20 billion, whatever it is, at this point it looks like it's about 5 billion, a little less than that. But to take some of that and set it aside so that you start protecting that money. And it wouldn't surprise me if over the next decade or two, little by little, they take out some each year or every 6 months so that they have money that isn't at risk sitting on the sidelines, so that if something drastic in the negative did happen, they'd still have plenty of money for operations.
Yeah, but again, that makes everybody think, what did they know that I don't know? And if they're going to take the money out and stuff it under the mattresses of all the apostles as they sleep at night so peacefully on billions of dollars, more power to them, I guess. But it definitely is something that everybody's questioning. So the timing is notable. The investment shift comes during a period of leadership transition. I mean, how interesting that they're suddenly doing this. So many things that they're doing that they've never done before, all of a sudden with President Oaks. It really makes me think there's a whole new strategy going on, behind everything. So, and of course, it says in short, the LDS Church remains extraordinarily wealthy. So like I said, I did talk to somebody kind of in the know in finance, and they said there could be various things going on. And we kind of already went over these, but I thought this was interesting. They could be moving to index funds. That would mean that we, meaning those people that try to track it, try to understand where the money's going and what's happening and how much money there actually is, we would be in the dark going forward about the stock portfolio and its size. So embarrassed by, the gargantuan fund moving it in this way, it wouldn't be able to be tracked so easily by somebody like the Widow's Mite. They wouldn't be able to tell. They could be downsizing just this portion since it's the most visible. This is something that everybody can see. It's right there in the stock market. It's reported. Let's just take this down a little bit because it's such a bad look. It's so inflated, right? It looks bad for a church to have 70 billion in stocks. So maybe they drop it down to 5 billion or something. And then there is less hard evidence of its vast wealth and hoarding. And that's kind of what you alluded to, Bill. They could be reallocating it to other vehicles, private equity, land, things that, again, aren't quite as visible, because it's such a bad look. They could be moving international. I hadn't thought of this one. And away from domestic. The US dollar has lost a lot of relative value in the past year. That's scary too. They know what's going on. Do the rest of us know what's going on? Should we be moving our money? I mean, it makes you nervous, right? And then there is the possibility that we're about to see some huge expenditures on the horizon. I've heard other people mention this. The BYU Medical School is a big one that this person I talked to was thinking of, although I feel like that's all going to be donations. You know what I mean? They never seem to use their own money. They seem to use the big net worth donors on that. And this person also says, but it could be something we aren't even aware of yet. Now, that's something to think about. What could cost billions of dollars that they could be about to do? I don't know, settling sexual abuse lawsuits? Maybe that's it. I don't think the Temple Square open house would hit anywhere near, even close to this. And I agree. I think that is not what this is going to be for, the 10 billion that disappeared. And then they said it's going to make things a little more difficult, making estimates going forward, talking about people that are a watchdog, like the Widow's Mite, that watch this and try to keep track. We have to assume that the sold stocks are just allocated equally across other investment options until we would get better information. They're just not going to be able to track it as well as they could. It's now a little more obscure. So one last slide that I just came across right before we came on. Faithful podcasters are thinking this means something. Taking out that amount of money right before General Conference? Is he near? Is it happening? So seeking signs, of course, which we're not supposed to do, but somehow they're linking the money and general conference, and also the fact that the church has put out an announcement for general conference much earlier than it has in the past. So this particular podcaster is linking all of this. Second coming, is it right around the corner? And can we track this through the stock market? So really interesting. Any final thoughts on that?
Just that anytime a Mormon predicts that Jesus is coming back soon, I will always take the opposite position and I will always win.
You should bet on that and put your money in the stock market, Bill. That's perfect. Oh my goodness. So we'll watch this. And especially the person I talked to said, if they start doing this quarter after quarter, year after year, then something is happening. Kind of like what you said, Bill, maybe, just every year divesting a little bit more. And then that really does mean something. So what it means, we don't know. We'll have to see. Bill's next story. I was really curious about this one. What do we have going on here?
Yeah, so this is Jana Reese in the Salt Lake Tribune. She says Latter-day Saints are opening up about sex. A shift is happening inside Mormon culture. More Latter-day Saints are openly talking about sex, relationships, and their bodies. Topics that used to be surrounded by shame, silence, and discomfort are making their way into settings that were once taboo. Therapist Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, who works primarily with LDS clients, says that years ago, simply discussing sexual pleasure or anatomy could trigger backlash, complaints to bishops, and accusations of promoting sin. Today, those same conversations are drawing huge audiences, sold-out events, and growing interest. By the way, back to my original story, it's this kind of stuff that plays into whether women and men, for that matter, are having their needs met by the institution in such a way that they feel like they are safe to explore who they are, safe to figure out what they want their world to look like. And often in high demand religions, and especially in a system like Mormonism, sex is sort of a thing we don't talk about. It's not something that is part of what church leaders generally address, and when they do, they're often on the wrong side of things. So it's this kind of stuff that I think plays into why women are stepping away from the church and beginning to say out loud the things that LDS leaders have said weren't allowed for essentially forever. But it says here, today, those same conversations are drawing huge audiences, sold-out events, and growing interest. It appears there is a changing cultural shift among members, especially younger ones, again, back to that original story, who are less willing to blindly defer to authority and more interested in understanding their own experiences. Many are questioning older teachings around modesty, gender roles, and sexuality, and the church itself has softened its tone in some areas, including updates to youth guidance, such as masturbation, for instance, which has a completely different framing than it did when I was a young adult in the church, that are described as less fear-based and more focused on personal agency. How does the future of Mormonism shape up as it figures its way between traditional Mormon sexual norms and modern members' desire for healthier, more open conversations? Well, that's yet to be seen. While older generations were often taught strict obedience and silence around sexual topics, many younger Latter-day Saints are now seeking insight, emotional health, and stronger relationships, even if that means re-examining long-standing church attitudes and cultural taboos. I think this is another great shift in the people. It's not necessarily church leadership that's doing this. People have had enough of old men deciding what is on the table and what is off, and people are having conversations out loud so that they can pursue their happiest, best, healthiest life possible. Your thoughts on Latter-day Saints talking about the dirty on the down low?
That's it. No, I think about if they say young people, I think a lot of it could have to do with their parents, which are probably our age. And maybe we, being raised the way we were, and we know how that was, have kind of said, we're not gonna have our kids feel that way. We're gonna be more open with our kids. We're gonna talk to our kids. And by kids, I mean young adults. But I feel like maybe their families were more open, despite what the church was saying. And I think maybe that just results in these kids that are like, we are free to discuss. And of course, it's not as bad as it used to be. We know that there hasn't been a little factory talk that I'm aware of for a while. But boy, did it used to be rough. And I think there's a backlash with parents our age that just say, I don't want my kids to go through that. And I now understand, and I have tools that are showing me that that was really unhealthy. The things that we learned, the things that we were taught, that we were exposed to, really unhealthy. And I think that we are taking care and protecting our children, and hopefully have raised them with, better ideas, better tools, access to correct information, things like that. So that's positive and encouraging, I hope.
It makes me think of the 1982 Spencer W. Kimball sending out a letter to
Yeah.
bishops and stake presidents, telling them that in temple interviews to ask members if they are practicing oral sex, and
Mhm.
if so, for the members of the church to recognize that that's an unholy and impure practice.
Yep.
And to this day, there are bishops and stake presidents who still ask that question, because the church, while retracting it in some ways, never spoke openly about being wrong for saying it in the first place. And I just don't think, again, it didn't fly too well then, but I don't think it would fly too well now, trying to control members'
No.
sex lives in the way that they tried to in 1982.
Nope, not at all. And kind of the impetus for that letter we learned was, oh, the bishop said the poor women would come in, and they would say that this was being expected. They had no understanding of women's sexuality, I don't believe. Not to get too graphic into it, but they really saw women as, being put upon. Poor women, they're being asked to do things they didn't want to do. I mean, maybe that might have been the case in some cases, but they completely disregard women's sexuality and equal partnership and what they might enjoy. And how dare they even weigh in on that? Honestly, how dare they? And I'm glad there was pushback, even back in 82, right? And yeah, they couldn't say anything like that anymore. They're not going to say anything like that, at least about a heterosexual couple. They will weigh in on same sex relationships and say you can't do anything. So they're still in there. They're still trying to worm their way into, people's private lives, but hopefully that'll change. So great story though. I think that's good. I think it's also access, don't you? Just to all kinds of tools and therapy and people that are saying it like it is. I mean, I think that's fantastic. One of the speakers was Julie Diazevedo at Thrive. And, she talked a lot about different things in relationships and open and honesty and tools. And I think that's available to anybody that wants to look for it. And it has to do with sexuality too. So
Yeah, I'll just say prophet, seers, and revelators playing catch up since 1820.
that's it. That's exactly right. All right. Excellent story. Okay. I think the next one, yes, is mine. Let's see. Oh, yes. A big shocking announcement. They are going to close part of Temple Square. This is so surprising. And it's going to be the conference center, which is not technically right on Temple Square. It's kind of across the street. And they say, let me see if I can blow this up here. It will be fully closed to the public from March 30th. So coming up just in a few weeks here, a month or so, through March 1st of 2027, except for general conference and other major events that are kind of yearly scheduled things. So of course I read this, and everybody knows what I said. I said, uh-oh, here it comes. Theme park, Mountain of the Lord. They're working on the people mover. They're getting everything ready. They need to close down so they can put together all this infrastructure. And I do believe that. I still believe that. I think we're going to be shocked when we go to the open house, the things that they have created there. The article says in the church news, this is to facilitate critical construction, infrastructure upgrades, and exhibit developments in preparation for the Salt Lake Temple celebration. They are really looking toward this. It's only a year away. The operational pause is essential to allow project teams to execute a significantly expanded scope of work and ensure the facility is fully prepared to support the elevated guest experience That phrase right there, guest experience, that is right out of Disneyland. That is right out of a theme park. The guest experience planned for 2027. So they're going to do a lot. And I think maybe we won't even really know until we get there and see it. So in this same article, I thought this was absolutely fascinating. It said Easter at Temple Square. And you know that I'm on a soapbox about Easter, and this just confirms some of the things I thought. It said Temple Square guests are invited to visit Temple Square to see the Easter displays. Have there ever been Easter displays on Temple Square? I'm not really aware of any kind of elaborate Easter displays, but we do have this talk a couple years ago. Do you remember this, Bill? Easter, the greatest Easter story ever told, Elder Stevenson, where he kind of said, I don't know why you guys haven't been celebrating Easter, right? So now on Temple Square, there's going to be Easter displays highlighting the life and ministry of Jesus Christ that will be installed beginning at the end of February. So it's coming up. I think this week they're going to start. Exhibits and visual installations will focus on his teachings, miracles, atonement, and resurrection. Do you think what I think, Bill, that they are trying to make Easter time on Temple Square just like Christmas time on Temple Square, a huge event, right? A destination. What do you think?
I think in order for the church to become more mainstream, and it has taken so much flack, so much negative press in the last decade, maybe it's just tired of walking around with black eyes and a gut punch to, a hurt to the gut. It may be just looking to get away from some of that. I will note the guy down there who says the greatest Easter story ever told is the same apostle who thought his prophet's name was Dallas.
This is true.
That is true.
Yeah, you have a good point there. And I will say this is AI on the right. This is not one of the installations, but I was trying to imagine maybe a Christus and an open tomb, some things like that they would do. And it's going to be an Easter destination. But that's interesting because if anybody comes there on Easter Sunday this year, and maybe hears music playing coming out of the conference center, can they go into the conference center? No, they cannot, which is why I made this meme. So you need a ticket for Easter service because you can't get into conference without a ticket. It's not Easter service. It's LDS General Conference. They skipped Easter this year. So I do think it might be problematic as guests visit on Easter Sunday and they see all the members of the church rushing into the conference center, but they can't go. They can't go in because you need a ticket. And I don't know if anybody has tried to attend conference recently, but they have droves of people surrounding the conference center with signs that say, need a ticket, drove all the way from Canada. We'll trade chocolate for tickets. We'll do anything for tickets. Family of 12 trying to get tickets. I mean, it is very competitive and it's almost like a circus to try to get in. So I think it'll be interesting on Easter Sunday when people go there. If they think they're going to be able to attend the Easter service, they are not going to be able to attend an Easter service. Now, somebody gave me this information I thought was extremely interesting from someone they knew who was part of this research. And they said in 2022 or 2023, they weren't clear on where it was, but it was exactly right around the time when Elder Stevenson was telling everybody, you need to celebrate Easter with all their traditions, right? The things that we've been told not to do before. So the first presidency asked an in-house think tank that does research for the church leadership to tackle a specific question. The first presidency wanted to know why the cross was not liked or used or appreciated by church membership. And if there was any doctrinal basis. Do you know why the cross wasn't liked or appreciated or used? We were told it should not be liked or appreciated. I mean, isn't that true, Bill? Weren't you raised to say, we don't do that, right?
Yeah, I did a podcast on this years ago, showing the history. Originally, it wasn't a problem.
Right.
Several of Brigham Young's children, either we have pictures of them wearing crosses or we have images of the crosses on their tombstones, as well as other early LDS leaders. It is sometime later on where church leadership trying to create a discrepancy between Mormonism and the rest of the Christian world depreciated Jesus's crucifixion and elevated his suffering in Gethsemane.
Yep.
And crosses went by the wayside at that time.
Yep. No, you're absolutely correct. But isn't that interesting that in anticipation of this huge push for Easter, which I think exactly what you say, Bill, is look at us. We're mainstream Christians. We do Easter. They also need to reintroduce the cross to all of us who are like, the cross, make a cross. No, we can't do that. So they asked this think tank and they did research, and they especially wanted to know, was there a doctrinal reason that we can't? And as in many cases, there is no doctrinal reason. It's just cultural, or it's just the idea of, some of the past leaders. So the research team determined that the LDS leadership turned against the cross in the 60s, exactly what you said, because of competition and bad blood with the Catholic Church in Utah. Like you said, to differentiate themselves. We are not Catholic. We do not do this. We celebrate or, acknowledge Gethsemane, not the crucifixion. So this was just as the LDS Church's brand new Easter campaign was beginning. So they're kind of getting all the ducks in the row, and all of us who, of course, are reeling from it, who are older, because we were not allowed to use the cross or appreciate the cross and stayed away from the cross. Thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, this reminds me back when there was the race ban, and there are other moments like this too, but where the brethren would ask Bruce R. McConkie, for instance, to go off and do some research and come back and make a presentation to the brethren on why we hold this, this position on race. And then you have moments where, like, Lester Bush is writing his article on the race doctrine in Mormonism. It went by a different name, but that was more offensive. And his article ends up getting into the hands of Spencer W. Kimball, who goes like, oh, like, we've been doing this thing, but we didn't have to do this thing. We could do it different. This reminds me of one of these moments where the church is essentially saying, before we make any drastic move and end up having to put our foot in our mouth because some prophet said something that was revelatory, doctrinal statement, let's just check and see if we're doing this for no reason at all before we make the cross part of our religious symbolism in the modern moment. So I have the impression that if this is the case, that it is just a matter of maybe another decade before the cross is just seen as relatively normal as a symbol inside of Mormonism.
Yeah, and maybe on buildings. Honestly, maybe I've noticed some temples that have on their spire, the ones that don't have Moroni, kind of like a little nub. I've seen that. I drive past the Orem Temple a lot. That almost looks like it's cross-esque, if that makes sense. It's kind of got that little jutting out to the side. So I think this is, and like I said, survey-driven, research-driven, data-driven. There's no reason we can't have a cross. People seem to want crosses. And I think that they wanted exactly what you said. Get this in order, because we're going to be inviting people to Temple Square. They're going to be coming for Easter, and they want to see a cross. That's the universal symbol. If we want the world to come here and see how Christian we are, we better have some crosses. And I think we're going to see that. There already is one cross statue on Temple Square, and we reported this on the newscast. We kind of broke this. It was kind of under the radar. This is not necessarily an Easter cross. I mean, it's more of a, life of Christ kind of a thing, one of many things, but it's there, on Temple Square. And so, of course, I went over to the church handbook, and, they talk about the cross here, but they say, however, the Lord has established his own symbols for the crucifixion, and that's the sacrament, right? There's always a but. There's always a however. However, we do not display the cross on our buildings, in the churches. That's still there on LDS.org. But then I came across this thing here in a handout to the Southeast area, talking about what you guys can do for Easter. They were offering, you guys can put up posters. We'll send you a packet. And here it says the cross is a central element of the Easter story. This is current right here. It is included in Easter activities. It should be done thoughtfully and with care, a universal symbol going on from there. So they're definitely letting wards and stakes and areas know, the cross is in. This is something that's okay. And we saw this last Easter season with crosses in the lawns of churches. So it's here to stay, I believe. Now, the other interesting thing this year, and I've talked about this before, General Conference is on Easter Sunday. And I keep trying to make the point that if the LDS Church truly were mainstream Christian, they would move conference. They would move their Mormon-centric event, and they would let the LDS members hold Easter services in their buildings and invite friends and family and neighbors. But instead, the LDS Church is going to make Palm Sunday that big celebration. So I made this imaginary banner that says, join us for Palm Sunday. We're pretending it's an Easter service because we have LDS General Conference on the actual Easter, and there's no way that we'll ever move it. And I think RFM even brought this up at Thrive in your presentation and said, how do you know that, the LDS Church values its doctrine, its Mormonism more than Jesus? They will not celebrate Easter on Easter Sunday when there's a conflict there. And I think that's an important thing to note. And so here is from that same flyer that the church sent out to the Southeast area, where it says, go ahead and plan a special program for Easter or sacrament meeting at Christmas time. But it says here, Palm Sunday this year, because Easter Sunday falls on General Conference. So they're just flat out saying, this is what we're doing. Palm Sunday is our Easter. And I have this quote down below here from Elder Stevenson, where he talks about, come on, you guys. I don't know why you didn't celebrate Easter before. Let's get it going. Let's borrow from traditions. Let's have these Easter ceremonies that we've shunned in the past. And even Jasmine Rappley put out a short where she said, I think in the future, when people think Easter, they're going to think Latter-day Saint. I don't know if that's true, but they seem to be trying for that. And of course, I always have to put this up from the handbook, which still says we don't do Palm Sunday. We don't do Ash Wednesday. We don't do Holy Week, but we do. So I hope they'll listen to me and change this in the handbook, because come on, it's a bad look. And then have you seen this, Bill? Have you seen this Latter-day Lent? We predicted this last week. They're doing it. Latter-day Lent. I still don't know who that hand is that has the authority to put the ashes on this young Latter-day Saint man. But they're doing it right there on their forehead. So I feel like within, like you said, not even a decade, a couple years, we're going to be full on doing every single thing that mainstream Christian do for Easter. Last thoughts on this before we go to the next one.
Yeah, a couple of things. So I'll note here, it seems like the leaders of the church are acknowledging they are not, in fact, prophets, seers, and revelators. Because if you were, you could simply ask God what he thinks about the cross being used in your religion. And again, living prophets trump dead ones. So they could certainly get a message from God that while past prophets diminished the cross, that there was no good reason for it, and that God himself was okay if you elevated the cross today. But that's not the route they took. Instead of praying, the LDS First Presidency asked an in-house think tank that does research for church leadership to tackle a specific question. Why do prophets, seers, and revelators need pilot programs, surveys, and in-house think tanks that handle questions? I can't figure that one out. Maybe somebody out there knows the answer. I'll say this too. The official language there from the church on the symbol of the cross, even this is so different than the Mormonism I grew up with in the 90s. Yep. Mormonism that RFM would say that he experienced in the 80s. This is so contrary to how Mormonism viewed the cross. You can just see the shift is happening. This is sort of that middle ground where you can use the cross, but be careful. It used to be never use the cross. Now you can use it if you're careful, and someday we'll all be wearing it around our necks. And then I'll just note one last thing here. Yes, RFM made the point that if Mormonism has to choose between rescheduling General Conference or rescheduling Easter, Easter's getting rescheduled.
Easter's getting rescheduled. I know. And when I brought this up, I think it was 2 weeks ago, RFM told me, he goes, I didn't quite understand what you were getting at or why you seem so, like, aha, this is an aha moment. But it is, because Easter Sunday is not always on General Conference. And this is the first time since the push starting in 2022 for Easter, where they had the chance to say, you know what, brothers and sisters, because we now, are really making an emphasis for Easter, we are going to reschedule General Conference, not the week before, because that would be Palm Sunday, which we also now celebrate, but the week after, but they're not doing that. So when the push comes to shove, when the chips are down, when the proof is in the pudding, I'm going to use all these phrases, they're not going to do it. The Mormon, and here's the thing, they will say, yes, but conference will be Easter, but it won't, will it? There'll be some talks on the resurrection and some talks on Jesus, but they're not going to not be able to talk about purity culture, shame, covenant path, Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith, and I'll eat my hat if that's true. If it's 10 hours of everything about the resurrection and Jesus, then I'll go, you know what? They did Easter, but they're not going to. It's going to be a few talks, and the rest of it is going to be Mormonism.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Like, even if we were in charge, you, me, and RFM, we're in charge, and we go, look, it's a cult. We're going to lie to people. We're going to try to fool them. Wouldn't it still make sense at kind of a common sense level to go, when Sunday of General Conference falls on Easter, let's just let the people believe that we value Christ more, and let's put Easter as a priority, and let's move our talking to the week before, the week after. It doesn't make any difference. We could announce it plenty in time, and it wouldn't it wouldn't affect anything. And wouldn't it be cool, as you just pointed out, when General Conference lands on Easter Sunday, if the brethren said, rather than doing the status quo, every single talk is going to center around the life, the sacrifice, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we are going to show the world, even if we're a cult and we're not true and we're just BSing our way through it, we're going to pretend in such a way that the rest of the world is going to go, isn't that cool? Those guys spent an entire day with all of their leaders talking about Jesus Christ, but not these guys. Their other messages are much more important.
Yeah, and it's funny because the RFM even said, when he said, I didn't understand what you were saying at first, when because he's always, like, you're harping on this. What's it about? What are you worried about now? And then he said, because it was so ingrained in himself that conference is always the first, like, you can't change that. That's a given. But then you have to step back and think, well, of course you can. That's not a given for any reason. And they can make a huge statement. And I just think about all the empty church buildings that people drive by on Easter Sunday and go, why isn't there anybody there? Because they're doing their Mormon thing. That's up here. Their Christian thing, it's really down here. So it'll be interesting. I'd love to hear from everybody what they observe on Easter Sunday, but I'm going to continue to talk about it because I think it's a big deal. It does not happen, conference and Easter Sunday, very often. I mean, I showed that list a couple of weeks ago. It doesn't happen very often. So it could be a very special occasion, and it could be, a footnote in the handbook. When this does happen, like you say, Bill, we do this because we're Christian. Not going to happen. So, all right, enough about Easter. Bill, I think you have the next story.
Well, I will say one more thing. Isn't it what we expect of Mormonism, to put up the appearance, right? To decorate the ground for Easter Sunday. And then when you walk in the conference center, it's not just General Conference, but it is 15 guys and their underlings trying to exact loyalty and obedience. The Easter message is something different. And maybe you top 15 will figure it out sooner or later. Hopefully sooner. But there's that. Okay, lest I digress, this is the next story. It is on the garments. Yes, it's me tonight talking about the garments. LDS garment. Yeah, the rules changed under Brigham Young. I will just say, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this article. I will just note this. They talk about where garments originated. They talk about the changes that have happened with the garment, including those that have happened recently. And I'll read this last paragraph, which is perhaps the most significant, is how the meaning of garments has changed. Earlier generations often viewed them as literal protection from harm. By the way, I wish when they said earlier generations, which seems like it's a blame to the members, I wish they would just add a couple more words. Earlier generations of leaders often viewed them as literal protection from harm, reinforced by faith-promoting stories. I heard one of those stories come out of the mouth of Elder Boyd K. Packer. Today, the church has shifted toward describing their protection in spiritual terms rather than physical terms. This is another instance of the church making a particular topic, when the data comes out and works against them, making it indiscernible from a fraud. By making the garment no longer have protective powers, we can no longer prove one way or the other whether the garment actually is special in any way. And the ways in which it is special are not tangible, they are invisible, and one cannot demonstrate them in any sort of test or data examination. So at the same time, the church has become more open about discussing garments publicly, something that was once considered too sacred to talk about openly. We all struggled with, even like, if I go to a doctor, how do I handle that? Like, will someone tell me what the past generations of Latter-day Saints did to handle that? Should I feel shame? Should I be embarrassed? What should I do? Should I wear normal underwear that day? And we never got these kinds of questions answered by the church. It was always having to go to another member and say, what did you do to handle this situation? Today, the church has shifted toward describing their protection in spiritual terms rather than physical, and they become more open. Again, something that was once considered too sacred to talk about openly, reflecting broader efforts to balance tradition with modern transparency and member expectations. This church, little by little, is retracting all of its supernatural claims and reducing itself to just being a church like any other. Little by little. It'll be interesting to see where we're at in a couple more decades. But that's all I've got on the garments. I don't think there's there is this. I will note, if you want to know a lot about the history of Mormon garments, go listen to Mormonism Live's episode titled History of Mormon Garments, and you'll learn a heck of a lot more than you would in the Salt Lake Tribune article.
Oh my gosh, I can't even look at that picture. It's just so I've heard, I like what you're talking about, where you're saying, the different ways that they describe garments and why you wear them. The phrase I hear now is putting on Jesus Christ. That phrase bugs the crap out of me. We're putting on Jesus Christ. Really? Yeah, it's very interesting. But, garments are not going to go anywhere, and they keep changing the rhetoric. And I was happy to see somebody in the chat say, of course, I perked up out of the corner of my eye when it said Rebecca was right. And I'm kind of reading, what am I right about? Right. But again, African garments, which were never meant to be here. And when they were discovered, they were here, and it broke everything open in terms of, what we wear, how we feel, how we think, what we say they mean. And it's going to continue to do that. So I love to watch this. All right. Oh my goodness. Fairview Temple. Of course, the go-ahead was given. They're ready to build. What happens next? They have to have a groundbreaking, right? Well, I was at Thrive. I was actually in one of the presentations when somebody sent me this email that had been sent out to the stake. This was on Saturday. I jumped up from the presentation. Everyone's like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm on it. I'm on the case. I have to figure out what this is. So this email went out to the stake on Saturday, and it has to do with a secret groundbreaking, right? A groundbreaking usually, Bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of advanced. It's announced in advance, right? They build like a podium. They put fake grass. They have that row of golden shovels. They have plants. They have seats up there where you on the podium where you can sit, and then they have people that stand up at a lectern and they talk. I mean, it's a big deal, and it's very open. Those are the ones that I'm used to. Well, this one wasn't that at all. So this letter went out on Saturday. Dear brothers and sisters, we are happy to share that ground was broken this afternoon for the Fairview, Texas temple. Due to the unique sensitivity surrounding this particular temple, the groundbreaking was intentionally kept very small and included Elder Jonathan S. Schmidt of the area presidency, Elder Jonathan G. Cannon of the Area 70, and a few local priesthood leaders and their spouses. We know that all of you would have wanted to participate in this exciting event, and we want to be clear that this decision was not intended to leave anybody out or cause any hurt. This temple would not have reached this important milestone without faith and prayers of so many, and we are grateful for your sacrifices. We look forward to the time we can openly and joyfully celebrate this sacred accomplishment together at the temple open house and dedication. Thank you for your continued understanding and support. What do you think of that letter, Bill?
There's this thing that they do where they thank everybody for participating in the process with their thoughts and their prayers and their pleadings unto God. When, if we remember what Fairview said, is that you're going to get your temple. You're never going to have an issue with getting the temple. You just have to follow the rules of the town. It doesn't have to be as big as you'd like it to be. It doesn't have to scream, look at me, look at me. It can be much more simple. It really didn't take the prayers, the pleadings of anyone. They were going to get their temple all along.
I just love the way they say openly. Hopefully we can openly finally go out. I don't know, community relations, this whole process, there's a lot of damage done there. But this happened in Cody, if you remember. The residents that I was friends with there texted me and said, something's going on. These black SUVs have pulled up. They're putting up a kind of a podium that, they did the same thing in towns where they know that community relations are shredded, almost beyond repair. They will just kind of sneak in quickly and do it. So I thought this was interesting that they let people know after the fact, and they had it on a Saturday. So then after the letter, they put out the announcement in the church newsroom, of course. And this is when I figured out what they did. So the title is Ground Broken for the Fairview, Texas Temple. And you can see, like they said, there's a few people there outside, right? And the site is right next to a stake center. And then from the other pictures, you can tell that they went inside undercover, and that's where they had the talks and the music and the information. But I love this picture here. If anybody wants to scroll in on this, this is a little display they set up there. Looks like you can see the seats in the chapel behind it. They have some lovely potted plants. They have a picture of Jesus, and they have a golden shovel, and he's just looking side-eye away from the shovel like, oh my God, this is not what I told you guys to do with your billions. Seriously. I mean, it's really funny if you scroll in on that picture. I just think it's hilarious. I do not want a golden shovel. I do not need pomp and circumstance. I do not need a big lit up temple where lawyers have told the residents that I live on the second floor. And that's the truth. We have it recorded. I don't need this. So I think that picture right there says it all. But they did go inside and have the groundbreaking ceremony, and now they're ready to build. So yeah, everybody pause on that. Or I don't know if Bill can even scroll in on that, but it is really funny the way Jesus is just going, oh my God, yeah, you guys are idiots.
Mormon digging then and now.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And so we'll see what happens next. But again, to me, I consider Fairview a success. The town and the residents worked together. It was going to be almost 200 feet tall, 65-foot walls. Those would have been as tall as the top of the stake center. Now 30 feet walls, 120 stipulations on when it can be lit. It's the best outcome, a win-win for everybody. So I'm excited for Fairview. Heber, not so much, because Heber is the temple where they had an all LDS county commission, and dark sky rulings were just cast aside. We've been talking about the back and forth. There's still a lawsuit headed for the Supreme Court, but the LDS Church has been given permission to start the process of building, even while the lawsuit is sitting there. And of course, the argument was, well, if they lose the lawsuit, they're going to have to tear everything down or replace everything that they did. And the church is like, that's okay, we'll do it. We'll replace it if that happens. They're pretty confident. But this was on a site here that tracks the progress of the Heber Valley Temple. And it says, the work is resumed, trucks are back, and the rig to help with the dewatering of the site are in position. Here we go, right? Here we go in big capital letters. Here we go. What? Here we go, pumping off 1 million gallons of water a day for at least several weeks, right? And then 300,000 gallons in perpetuity. Here we go. And I really do question, how will the LDS Church, if they do lose the lawsuit and have to restore the land to the way it was, how do they do that? How do they put back that water? And I just had to remind everybody about the water, and we had done a podcast before about it. So I just went to the transcript, and I'm going to reread what I said because sometimes it's hard to remember those facts and figures. But it says, this was a letter I wrote to the editor about the dewatering, which means pumping away with 20 wells around that site, taking it out of the groundwater and having it go into the river. Says, as part of the Heber Valley Temple construction, 1 million gallons of water a day will be pumped out of the ground for a month or more. That's the size of almost 2 Olympic swimming pools a day. I know it's very hard for us to visualize, but that's maybe you can wrap your brain around what that is. After a month, this amount will be reduced to the size of 1 Olympic swimming pool per day through construction to dewater the ground. And then going forward forever, they will dewater the site using a gravity method, kind of natural water flowing out, and that will be up to 125,000 gallons a day. And then the pumps will take out an additional 150 gallons. So it's going to be about 300,000 gallons of water a day in perpetuity forever coming out of that site. And it's because they have a below ground baptismal font and the water table is too high. If they didn't have a below ground baptismal font, they wouldn't have to dewater it. So it's fascinating to me that, they're going to start that. The LDS members are very excited. Here we go. The other residents, not so excited. And in fact, they have created the Heber Valley Aquifer Alliance. This is a nonprofit that is here to raise awareness and protect this aquifer that's here. Let me see if I can read exactly what it says. This is on Facebook and it's a group. And it says the Heber Valley Aquifer Alliance, the HVAA, works to protect, preserve, and sustain the Heber Valley Aquifer through science-based advocacy, public education, and policy engagement. We partner with hydrologists, state scientists, water experts, and community leaders. And I would encourage everybody to go join this group or check it out. They have all kinds of studies showing how detrimental this pumping by the LDS Church is going to be to the land there. It says our valley's lifeline is under pressure. And there's a picture there on the left of some of the pumps. And so they're just trying to raise awareness as we all have for several years, that this is not great, what they're trying to do just for this under slightly below ground baptismal font, which they don't even need to have it below ground. So again, a soapbox on the pumping of the water. But Bill, any thoughts on that? Just it's beginning, I guess today, the pumps are there.
I think it is such a strange thing when we've seen articles in the last couple of years about how the Great Salt Lake is diminishing, that the water levels there are getting quite low, that Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam, that the water levels there are quite low. And the state of Utah, it has down here in southern Utah, a lot of the reservoirs have dried up. A lot of the rivers or small lakes are much lower than they used to be. And so at a moment where Utah should be really concerned about its water levels, you have the LDS Church who claims that it cares about Utah and does some things to make the state nicer and to look out for the future, is going to pump this much water into the river and out of the state, all in the name of making sure we have our font below ground so that it symbolically matches what we'd like to do when there are plenty of other instances of a font not being below ground.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I've talked to different engineers about this. So I'm not trying to be like alarmist or exaggerating. And they do say water does naturally flow through the ground to the rivers, and ends up in the Jordanelle Dam. But, I've also talked to the people in this organization here that have done some studies, and, it just messes with the natural balance of things. And do you really want to do that, like you said, at this very precarious time where we don't know how it's going to go drought wise? We don't know what this is going to do. We don't know what this is going to do to the houses right around where they're pumping. Do they need flood insurance? Does this impact their infrastructure? As there's more water right there in that area, there's all kinds of things like that. And the church said in the beginning, yeah, we did some studies, it's going to be fine. But I don't know, the people I've talked to in this alliance, there's a lot of data that they're just really messing with, what's there, and it may not be the greatest thing. So we'll wait and see, but it is interesting. And you're right. I've heard of fonts that are literally half an inch below ground. It just has to be symbolically right there, or not at all. I mean, I don't know. I hope more people are aware. I hope as they actually start seeing this water pumped out, they'll go, hey, wait a minute, when did this happen? Because some people haven't followed it like the rest of us have. And I really do hope people will weigh in, will take a look at this website, and I really hope that there's something that can be done. So anyway, on to something after water. I think we're on to, you know what? This also is liquid, right? Here we go. This is a great story. I was interested in this one for sure.
Yeah, this is water into tea, or at least some of the ingredients of it. A new controversy is broken out over green tea after BYU quietly pulled energy drinks from its campus creamery because they contained green tea extract. The move shows once again a tension inside Mormonism about what the word of wisdom actually forbids and how much the believer can make their own choices while remaining in good standing with the faith. While the word of wisdom clearly bans coffee and tea, the modern reality is more complicated. Many popular drinks contain tea extract as an ingredient, and some members either don't realize it's there or don't see it as violating the spirit of the rule. The church has clarified that both green tea and black tea come from the same plant and are therefore prohibited, regardless of whether they're hot, cold, or hidden inside another product. But this creates obvious inconsistencies. Members freely consume caffeinated sodas, energy drinks, and other stimulants, even though caffeine itself isn't banned. Strangely, in Mormonism, the source of the ingredient matters more than the actual effect on the body. And I'll just note here, I had a lot of fun today. I'm actually used things I learned from my research here to begin preparing an episode on the Word of Wisdom. I've covered this as a topic before, but I found a few cool things that I think make it interesting to go into detail again about this. You not only have this story, you have a recent update to the handbook a few years back about how to handle medical cannabis use and other things. We've got first presidency letters in the past in regards to kava or sanka. So I'll read you something here, the highlighted part of that first presidency letter. And that was probably the coolest thing I found today. But I'll just say, this isn't the first time that Latter-day Saints have wrestled with gray areas and substitutes. Over the years, members have debated everything from herbal teas to kombucha, kava drinks, energy products derived from the tea plant. Herbal teas were eventually allowed because they don't come from the tea plant, while green and black tea remain prohibited, even when used as extracts or additives rather than traditional tea. This, by the way, I'll just say this. Somebody out there, you should create a really good comedy skit where somebody says something about how the Word of Wisdom is defined, and then you constantly come back with, well, that doesn't actually work that way. Is it the caffeine? Well, it's not the caffeine. It's you could essentially show that the goalpost is always moving no matter how you tackled it.
No, that's a great idea. I've seen a commercial like that having to do with what's healthy for breakfast, where future you comes back and says, no, we were wrong. It wasn't the caffeine. I think that's a great idea. Somebody jump on that.
Yeah, maybe I'll start working on that after the newscast. These recurring debates show that members are constantly trying to interpret. By the way, leaders are also constantly trying to interpret and apply a 19th century rule to modern products, such that Joseph Smith could never have imagined. What this latest BYU decision really exposes is that the Word of Wisdom isn't as simple or clear as it's often presented. Instead, it relies heavily on institutional interpretation, local application, and hearsay out of wards and stakes, as well as evolving cultural norms. The result is a health code where the boundaries aren't always obvious, and faithful members are left trying to figure out where the line is and feeling pressure and shame to get it right. This first presidency letter, there's another one there on the top left, the littler, smaller, brighter white one, and that's the one that also dealt with, I believe, Sanka. But in this other one here, on the right, the more vintage looking, I want to read just this bottom paragraph. For your information, please be advised that the drinking of a beverage made from the coffee bean, from which the caffeine and deleterious drugs have been removed, is not a violation of the Word of Wisdom. And the drinking of Sanka is not a justifiable reason for denying a temple recommend to one who is otherwise worthy. Now, you get that statement, but then you get other statements, and I think this other letter to the top left, as well as other moments in church history where leaders do caution members against drinking Sanka or against drinking decaffeinated coffee. And on one hand, we say it's the caffeine. And in other instances, we say it has nothing to do with the caffeine at all. It's just the tea in the coffee plant, or the tea in the coffee plant. And members going around drinking 2 liters of Mountain Dew every day. Again, I wish the LDS Church, with its prophets, seers, and revelators, could actually figure out what is the boundaries and structures of the Word of Wisdom, so that it could apply from generation to generation without all this silliness. But that is that. The debate right now is that that there's been some energy drinks which had green tea as an ingredient. The church was those were being sold on BYU's campus, but not anymore. The church caught on. We must get rid of those tea plant ingredients. Thoughts from you?
The scrupulosity of people, and I follow social media faithful site a lot, and they're all in there. I looked and there's a tiny little ingredient. Do I have to throw this away? What should I do? What about this? Can I drink that? What about, or they're still doing it. They've been doing it for, a century and a half, and that is not the point. I feel eventually they're just going to have to take the word of wisdom out of the Temple Recommend interview and let people do what they want to do, because there's so many different opinions on this. But green tea is a huge one. I remember I got some kind of swag from some kind of show I went to, and I brought it home. My parents were visiting me. I was, a grown-ass adult, and one packet was like a little green tea energy thing. It wasn't even really tea. It just said green tea supplement or something. My dad looked at that like it was a crack pipe. I'm not kidding. He's like, "What is that, Rebecca?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's some kind of, the green tea thing, it's just ridiculous." And, black tea, green tea, and white tea are all brewed from the same root. It's just a different way of brewing it. So that's what you can't have: black, green, or white. Herbal is not even really a tea. It's just hot water with some flavoring. Rooibos tea, that's a different bush. So you can have that. It's exhausting. Caffeine, yes. Caffeine, no. Nobody seems to know, but I hate it that it makes people scouring those ingredients, looking for one tiny little thing that it says, and then saying, I can't. I don't think that was the intention. That's not a word of wisdom. That's ridiculous.
Do you think the young people are just ordering their mocha latte frappuccinos anyway?
Yes, I do. I do know that and when I say young, I mean like 30 and younger, they are saying, you know what, that's between the Lord and me, and I feel good about this. And I'm not wearing my garments. I can wear them whenever I feel like it. That's between the Lord and me. And that is what they're doing. But just that scrupulosity part of it, it just drives me nuts, because it's the letter of the law, and that's not even the intention. I will say that I came across an article on KSL about the benefits of coffee. I couldn't believe it. There it was. And there was a cup of coffee in the picture. It was on KSL church news site, and it talked about, lowering risks of dementia and all the benefits. We've been reading these forever, of course, these kinds of articles, but this was on KSL, and it did make some of us think, are they sort of prepping everybody for a change, a shift, health benefits? This is why we're going to make the shift. Or, we never said you couldn't drink coffee. I mean, could it be like that? They do it with other things. It's something that really differentiates us. But I did a report, I think it was on the newscast maybe last year, about tea, especially in other countries where tea is more than just tea. It's society, it's social, it's business, it's trust, it's community. And when you can't drink tea, it shuts you out from a lot of opportunities. It's bigger than just tea. And so I don't know, in other countries, I feel like they really need to start making that concession. I don't know. It's a big deal. I love tea. Absolutely love it. And iced coffee. Sorry, but I do.
I have to have my coffee every day. It is a sacred ritual that I am glad to have in my life.
Yep, it is a ritual. And I do have to say, I have a family member talk about health benefits who was having trouble on their mission, being alert, staying awake. Nobody was going to come out and say it's because it's so dang boring. But the prescription from the mission home was, drink a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew every morning before you go out. I'm not kidding. That was the prescription, to see if that could help alertness. When really, a cup of coffee, something that's good for you, so many health benefits, helps alertness. That would have been so much better. But no, go ahead and drink that 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew, and that'll help you in the mission field. So I don't know. Bad advice. Really bad advice. All right. Are we done? Did we do it? Oh my goodness. Look at this. We got through all the stories. So I guess next we will talk about what is coming up next this week. We have a lot of good stuff. Oh, this was your presentation from Thrive. I was on the front row. It was fantastic. Why don't you tell everybody what this was and how they can watch it?
Yeah, just really quickly, on our YouTube channel, the Mormon Discussion YouTube channel, we did put out the episode live as it was happening at Thrive. I will say there are moments where RFM is standing up and the audio goes out for a moment, but if you'll stick with it, John DeLynn does come to the rescue. He does hold the microphone for RFM. and I think you'll see the sound come back. Sorry, AI is trying to capture the image of the rock in the hat while also capturing the image of Joseph Smith burying his head.
It's
And
impossible.
it failed miserably, but let's be honest, it wasn't working whether he had his head in the hat or not. So there is that, but you can go check that out on the channel.
Yeah, and I was there and it was fantastic. I mean, there's so much good information. It was on Saturday night, so everybody was just there, and RFM was, doing this great demonstration and talking about how he had brought the rock in the hat to a gospel doctrine class, to show everybody how it was done. And then Bill had great information on everything. So yeah, everybody check that out, please. It was fantastic. And Mormonish has an episode coming up on Tuesday night, tomorrow night at 6 p.m. When we taped this episode a couple weeks ago, there had been several articles, Elder Rasband and the MTC saying, we're growing, it's beyond belief. And there had been articles from Africa, oh, look at us grow in the missionaries. And Ron Jorgensen, who's one of my favorite researchers that helps out with our channel, he's like, that is not true. And I want to put together something that people can watch so that when their faithful relatives say, we're growing, they can definitively say, look at this, using your own data that the church does share. And it has a lot to do with wards shrinking and being dissolved. And I have to say, I was stunned. And I tracked this, but I have not seen this put together the way Ron put it together. I was shocked at the shrinkage, that he was able to show. Are they aware of their shrinkage? I don't know, but they will be after they watch this episode. So everybody tune in. It is Tuesday night at 6 p.m. And I think you guys are next then on Wednesday night. What's going on with this episode?
Yeah, that's a great question. RFM did message me today, and I'm trying to remember here. Let me do this. Let me pull this up really quick because he's in charge. He's in charge of Wednesday's episode, and he said, "Let's see here. It's going to be titled 129 felonies." And I would have to read a bunch to know exactly what it is we're going into, but I will say that I think it's going to be a great episode. We do have a guest that he's working out the details for. That's a person who goes by the name of Bill Law, so William Law, but that's just his pseudonymous name. And with a name like 129 felonies, I don't think you're going to want to miss this one.
And I see somebody in the chat who says they're Bill Law that's saying it's 293 felonies. So I don't know. You guys are going to have to tune in Wednesday night to find out how many freaking felonies there are, but there are a lot. Let's just say that. So, and I did notice some people asking, where did you say RFM was tonight? And he's still traveling back from Thrive. He kind of stopped off along the way. So yeah, that's where he is tonight. So, but I think he was in the chat for a little while. Who knows? He's so elusive. So, and then of course, Friday night, you guys have this coming up.
Friday, 8 p.m., Mormonism After Dark. Grab an adult beverage, stay up a little late, enjoy the laughs and the good times as we talk about some of the things that happened last minute in Mormonism. And I'm sure Thrive will come up if you want to know a little more about what our experience was there at Thrive.
Yeah, it was an awful lot of fun. That's what I'll say. And we loved meeting all of you guys. Some of you in the chat are popping in and saying it was so fun to meet you. And it really was. It was excellent. And then you, of course, have this that we can talk about with the Almost Awakened podcast. Yeah,
just really quick. Teresa put this episode out this week, and the review and the views on it are just astounding compared to most Almost Awakened episodes. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5,000 views at this point. It's made some travel around. A bunch of people have shared it. Mormonism, a narcissistic system, why it's never enough. And so this is the most recent episode of the Almost Awakened podcast.
Yeah, I just saw that reposted when I was kind of scrolling around right before the newscast. I'm like, wait, that's Teresa. That's fantastic. So yeah, I'm glad that's getting a lot of play. And people were in the comments where it was reposted, were saying this is spot on. Yeah. This needs to be seen by everybody. So I'm not surprised to hear that there's a whole bunch of views on that. So that's fantastic. So all right. Any final thoughts about anything we've talked about tonight? I think it was an awesome episode. We missed, of course, RFM, but there were some great stories to cover, and there will be even more stories next week, I'm sure. We appreciate all of you watching on Mormon Discussions and watching over on Mormonish. I don't know how you guys do that. Do you bounce back and forth? I don't know. I see the comments kind of all at once, but I love it that you guys are supporting both channels wherever we happen to be, liking and subscribing, making those donations if you feel so inclined, because we feel the love, don't we, Bill?
We do. And I will say one thing, which is if there was a common theme tonight, it seemed like there were 3 or 4 stories where prophet, seers, and revelators were struggling to figure out what to do and needed some help from those around them, or were quite late to the game and getting around to fixing something.
I think you're right. I think we saw that in a variety of stories about different topics. So I don't know what that says, but yeah, I'm glad we were able to kind of bring that together. So, all right, everybody, we will catch you next week, Monday night, same time, 6 p.m. We will see you for the Mormon Newscast. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast.